Good evening and welcome to Giant Steps Instagram live series. It's Friday, April the 2nd, 5 p.m. And I'm very excited to be back. And this week we have a very special guest. It's David Kiss, who is a DJ, and he's also the music and booking director of about to join me. So David is coming up any second now. Waiting for him. There he is. David.
Hey, hold
How
on.
are
I'm
you?
waiting.
I'm going to put my
Waiting to
headphones
see
on.
you. It says it's connecting. But
I
I
can
hear you.
I can see you.
Well, that's good. Let's just see here.
Okay. Can you hear me, David?
I can hear you, but I can't see you. It says it's connecting.
Okay. I can see you.
Let me try this.
Okay. So while we're connecting, I just want to give a special mention to an important person who we found out had passed away last night. Gabby. Gabby was a New York institution. She was behind clubs like Submersa, APT, The Standard, Soho Grand in Miami. She did a bunch of stuff, and she was a very, very special person for New York nightlife and culture, and a big supporter. And unfortunately, she passed away. So I just wanted to pay a little bit of a tribute to her, and her spirit's going to live on, because what we're talking about today is sort of nightlife and amongst other things, of course. So I just thought it was important to say that. So can you see me now, David?
I can see you.
Yeah, and you can hear me?
I can hear you. There's
Awesome.
a bit of a delay, but I think we're okay.
Great. Okay. Well, David, welcome. I hope you're well. I believe you're in upstate New York, right?
I am right now. I am in Newburgh, New York, about an hour and a half north from the city.
Lovely. So, David, we've known each other probably about 5 years or so, maybe a little longer. I think we first met when myself and Giant Step were running the Samsung experience store in the meatpacking district, and you were one of the DJs. And I thought your DJ sets were great, very eclectic. And then we'll get into it more, but we continued sort of like connecting with some other projects that we worked on together. But it wasn't really until, and we even actually met each other on a beach in Dominican Republic a couple of years ago as well, in the middle of nowhere. But it wasn't really until recently that when I learned your story, I thought it'd be great to have you as a guest, so you could tell your story, because I feel it's a very unique one. But also, it's when people hear it, it's going to sound very disparate to where you are today. But I also want to make a lot of connections to your past with your present. Through this talk as well. So, like I said, thank you for joining. And I think we should start at the beginning with you, David. Tell us about your unique, sort of like early years.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me here. It's great to speak with you. My background, as you said, I was raised in the Hassidic and Orthodox Jewish community here in New York. My family actually isn't that big, but my grandparents and great-grandparents were, and my mom wanted me to be like a Hasidic rabbi. So she sent me to Hasidic elementary school. And
this was
pretty much,
And David, this was in Brooklyn or this was in New York?
This was in Rockland County, which is about 40 minutes north of, in this enclave called Muncie. There's a pretty big Hasidic and Orthodox Jewish community
Yeah.
there. My
Yeah.
dad lived in Brooklyn, which is kind of rare at the time in the community. And so my dad lived in Brooklyn and my mom lived in Muncie.
So, sorry, I'm going to keep stopping you to ask you questions. So you said that
Sure.
your grandparents were already in the Hasidic community, and your mother kind of. So were your grandparents Holocaust survivors from Europe? When did they come
Yes.
to the? Okay, because
Yeah.
the Hasidic community really, what was left of it after the devastation of the Holocaust. They came obviously to, I think it was United States and in Israel, which is where they kind of tried to regenerate.
Right. So yeah, all my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. Dad's parents were like married to other people and had complete other families before the Holocaust that they lost. My mom's parents met in the DP camps. My mom's dad was like running around Europe trying to match up like children that were separated from their families with family members. They met, and my grandparents, my dad's parents emigrated here to Crown Heights, I believe, in Brooklyn, and
It's my hood.
Yeah, your hood. And that's where my dad grew up, and on President Street. And my mom's parents went to Israel, and she moved. It was 11 or 12 on the boat at Ellis Island, I think. Yeah.
And
So
they and
so yeah, they're like Hasidic, especially my mom's parents. They were heavily Hasidic. My mom were from this Hasidic sect called Ger,
mm-hmm.
and I'm like closely related to the rabbis in that
Yeah.
family. So my mom kind of wanted me to be, following in the footsteps of that.
So you were going to become the sort of long lineage of Hasidic rabbis, taking it to the next generation, especially the fact that so many had perished in the Holocaust. It was all about sort of rebuilding and rejuvenation. I think for the people tuning in, could you tell us a little bit about the roots of the Hasidic community? Because obviously it's part of Judaism, but it is a very different wing of what people know about Judaism. And I mean, everybody's seen the Hasids walking around, especially in Brooklyn, but people don't really know that much about them. So could you tell us a little bit about the sort of the history when that movement started?
Yeah, it's interesting. The movement started around 350 years ago, and it was started by this rabbi. His rabbi name, which I think was the name of a book that he wrote, is Baal Shem Tov, and he basically tried to democratize Judaism for normal folk, because basically, unless you had the means to send your children to study or to study yourself all day, you really didn't have a strong connection. So he saw that, and he kind of created a new thread that was more focused on spirituality, on singing, on prayer, on meditation even, and also just a more about Kabbalah and esoteric ideas of Judaism. And that movement exploded, and all his original students, they went back to their villages and started their own sect. And all these sects now come from his students. So like, the Satmar sect in South Williamsburg, that's, they're the current rabbis, because there's two there. That was their great grandfather or something like that. So that's kind of where it came from.
And I mean, it was the democratization. And I think if you look at sort of like how social media has democratized a lot of things in our lifetime, it was the printing press that really democratized Kabbalistic the Kabbalistic movement, because it allowed a very secret spiritual sector of the religion to kind of go into everybody's homes, because it was now cheap and easy to sort of distribute books and paper. And so I think it's very interesting that it was a democratization of a very secret, special sort of spirituality, which is Kabbalah, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that was very controversial at the time. And the other thread of Judaism, which wasn't following this, they're like really were against it. And till this day, there's like the what's called yeshivish Jews and regular Orthodox and the Hasidic Jews, and I think they've kind of come together a little bit, but there is like a clear difference. And I went to both types of schools. For high school, I went to yeshivish school, which felt cold and not as like warm as the Hasidic just movement that I was used to, and that's like an ongoing running joke in the Jewish community about how yeshivish people are like cold and Hasidim are warm.
Got no soul. So when you were growing up, you did not listen to secular or Western music. You weren't listening to the radio. You're a DJ, but when you talk about the music that you were listening to as a young kid, and when you first experienced, pop music and just Western music in general.
Yeah, I mean, mostly I listen to what is basically Hasidic and Orthodox pop music, and some folk music. There's this guy called Shlomo Kalbach, who's like a big folk composer, rabbi figure, and I listened to a lot of his music. My dad was really into it, and only Hasidic pop music. The only secular music I heard was some classical music that my mom put on the radio, and every like day at 5 p.m. I forgot what that radio station was, but that was like the only classical music I heard. And my dad liked Yanni, so I knew Yanni, and yes, I know like all the Yanni catalog really well. So yeah, and they actively discouraged.
You ever incorporated that into any of your DJ sets? For a little bit of slip a little Yanni in there.
Actually, recently I did as a joke. I did this thing with for the Borat 2 movie, and I had this alias as like Borat's DJ. It was like a promotion for the movie, and I played a Yanni song, and it was like full circle for me. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I couldn't listen to any non-Jewish music. I didn't know it existed really. And in the school that I went to, they actively discouraged us from listening to any music like that. They really disparaged it, and also pretty much discouraged us from being musicians as well, which is odd, but just was the thing, So yeah, I didn't hear any of that until I was around 13.
Were you curious at all about?
I didn't know to be curious, my only window out was my mom had a little TV that she didn't know that I knew she had. And so I'd play like hooky from school and watch daytime, like daytime soaps and Ricky Lake and some cartoons, I'll get to like the Power Rangers or whatever. So that was really the only understanding I had of something else that was going on. So I didn't really know that music was, I was like really into the Hasidic music that I listened to, which now I see the thread, like it was pretty much disco that had been like ripped off and in this Hasidic disco music, which I ended up playing as a musician later on at weddings.
If music was being discouraged as far as playing music, instrumental music was being discouraged, you started playing music. How did that? You started learning instruments. How did that come about, and who was teaching you?
Well, my dad is a cantor, and his dad was a cantor, and my dad is really into music, and my dad and his brothers were wedding musicians at one point. So my older brothers were encouraged to play instruments by my dad. So my oldest brother is a drummer. My brother Moshe above me is a guitar player and a keyboard player and a vocalist. And so it was encouraged by my dad, and he bought them instruments and got me a violin. Eventually I wanted to play saxophone. I was like fully encouraged, and we would do like a bit of a Partridge Family sort of thing. We'd go away for Passover, actually. It's Passover right now, to a hotel where we would be part of the entertainment at the hotel. And as a family, we would perform. So that's like kind of what was happening. And the school that I went to was not into it at all. They were quite very against it. And my principal was not into me learning an instrument or doing any of this. So yeah, it's just my dad. I owe it to him.
And so who was teaching you? Was your father teaching you as well, or you had outside teachers who came in and taught you?
No, I was self-taught. When he got me a violin, which I didn't really want to play. When he got it for me, he got me a VHS with it. So I kind of just watched the VHS and just figuring it out. And as I got older and had access to my brother's instruments, I just would like sit down at the keyboard and figure it out, you know? And then when I was I was like 14, 15, I convinced my mom to buy me a saxophone, and I did have a teacher for a little bit, but generally I was just playing by ear.
And so at what age did you start hearing secular music, Western music? And what was the first thing you heard?
I think I was 14, and I was in my brother's room, my older brother Mo, in his room, and he had two CDs that I put on. One was Billy Joel, The Stranger, and the second was a compilation of Elton John's love song.
And why? So he had the music.
Disney stuff.
So he had music.
Yeah, he had it, and he was like, he had music. He had like Led Zeppelin posters on his wall, and I basically just like stole these CDs from him and just started listening, and I was like blown away. And then I started listening to like Howard Stern and K-Rock and local radio, point 7, Kiss FM, which actually I have an old poster behind me of that.
Which is your last name as well. So
I actually have this poster because my dad pulled it off of a bus in the 80s and had it in my room, and I didn't know what that was until I was like around 13, 14, and I started just putting it on. I was listening to Isaac Hayes be the DJ and playing all this amazing music, and that's kind of how I just discovered it. And once I found it, I was just hooked. It was like a constant just trying to figure out how to get money to buy CDs.
But your parents were divorced. Were you living with your mother or your father at this point?
I was at this point in Brooklyn. So I just had more exposure to, the real world. I was in Brooklyn. I was walking around, and I kind of was just like discovering all this stuff, pop culture, everything was very new and interesting to me. I was actively trying to avoid anyone knowing about it because it was allowed or it was looked down upon.
And how were you dressing? Were you dressing like all the other Hasids? I mean,
yeah. So when I was 13, I moved to Brooklyn with my dad, and I went to not a Hasidic school. It's just a yeshiva high school, and every day I was wearing a white shirt, black pants, and like a fedora hat. I know you've seen that around your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Pretty much like that. And I couldn't wear anything else. In fact, like the school I went to was really strict. They didn't let you wear like a blue shirt, or if you had stripes on your shirt, there was actual rules about how far apart the stripes had to be. Like they were very, very specific about what you could wear. So pretty much the only rebellious stuff I could do with clothing was, and my style was, I tried to like let my hair grow a little bit. After like a certain amount of time, they would like make me go get a haircut and cut off the hair over here. It's called a chup when you have a little bit of hair. Mm-hmm. And they just, they didn't allow it. And when I was around 14 or 15, I moved in with my mom again. At this point, she was living in New Jersey and she was married. She had remarried to this modern Orthodox guy who listened to non-Jewish music, and it was just more of a secular vibe. And at that point, I was just like, well, I'm just going to wear whatever I want, and started the full act of rebellion.
And when you were growing up, your household, you were talking what you were talking Yiddish, or you were talking English in the house? So
Until I was around 10 or 11, my mom insisted on only speaking Yiddish with me. So I speak English until I was around 8. And I pretty much learned it from my cousin. They were teaching it in the Hasidic school I was at, but they were like, it was pretty bad. I wouldn't say it was a strong academic upbringing. So just speaking Yiddish, yeah. Wow. Speaking Yiddish and learned in like, classical Hebrew and the Talmud in Aramaic. So, I can kind of still understand all that stuff, but no English.
And you probably weren't learning any sort of like practical things that normal kids learn in school, like math and literature and geography. Those weren't subjects you were covering at the Hasidic school, right?
Actually, a little bit, because they have to. It's like mandated by the school. Most of the day we'd be learning like, Jewish studies, and then for a few hours at the end of the day, when we've been there all day since 7 a.m, they would have, one teacher for the class teach all those subjects. And, not much got through because at that point we'd been sitting in class all day. And actually, it's like probably a nightmare for a teacher to teach about a bunch of boys that have been sitting in their desks all day, trying to teach them English, math, all this stuff. So there was a little bit. I do remember being, I was like pretty good at reading comprehension and at writing. So that was like something that my mom would take me to the library and actually let me read secular books. So that was like pretty much the only academic upbringing I had. My math skills are pretty bad right now still.
Don't worry about it. Mine are bad too.
Yeah, got a calculator on my phone.
Wow. So when you were 15, that's when you really broke out. But before that, you were playing in a band with your family. You were playing at Jewish functions like weddings. Talk a little bit about that experience, because now obviously you're a DJ, and that was probably your first entertaining experience in many ways. Talk a little bit about that.
Right. Yeah. We actually didn't start playing weddings myself until I was 18 or 19. And I was like learning, I had basically taught myself how to play guitar. But as a child with my family, we were playing like synagogue functions and Passover at the hotel. And my older brother is still a professional musician in that world. And so when I was around 18 or 19, I think I got my first gig as playing electric guitar at a wedding. And that was kind of what I did for many years, that and singing with a cappella, because on the Sabbath, you can't have live instruments. So I'd go like sing at a bar mitzvah or any sort of Jewish function and sing a cappella and get these gigs during the week. And it was great. I loved it. It's kind of like a marathon thing that you do. These weddings are usually at least 4 hours long, 5 hours, and you end up playing with really good musicians. I felt I was playing with like incredible musicians, most of whom and kind of getting my chops that way. So I would do that and sing, and it was great. In fact, I used to do a lot of it in Crown Heights, your hood, play at those Hasidic weddings there, and that was some of my favorite gigs were there because it's crazy.
Yeah, and recently there's been a lot of interest in sort of like the Hasidic community and sort of like getting insight into that with the HBO show Unorthodox, which was about obviously a Hasidic woman who left the sect, escaped from the sect, and moved to Germany to see, to try and discover their life and get into music, which was their passion. I asked you, when we were talking a couple of days ago, if you'd seen it. You said you hadn't, but just talk a little bit about how hard it is to leave the sect, because it's it's not like you go, hey, I'm out of here, goodbye.
Right. Yeah. It was quite difficult. I mean, I consider myself lucky because my parents are divorced. So because my parents are divorced, they weren't full, and probably one of the reasons they got divorced, they weren't fully aligned on the way they practiced Judaism. And my dad, while extremely religious, was not as hardcore about it as my mom. He had TVs in the house that were out, he wasn't like, he was speaking English to me, and he, encouraging me to play instruments. My mom was this other extreme. So as I grew up, I just had this thing of different options. And so when I was around 15 or 16, I was just discovering this whole world around me. I just kept questioning everything and wanted to be in the real world. And it was very difficult because my English was not great. The English that you hear me speaking now, I pretty much just like I was like putting it on, I was like fixing it so that I would just sound like anybody else. I felt quite awkward. Definitely still have like social anxiety from that, because I was just like, in this other world. In fact, like one of my earliest memories from this is I went to community college for like about a semester and a half, and my first day sitting in community college, surrounded by like, it's co-ed, I had not really spoken to any girls, women that weren't family members until that point. I was like 17 then. So it was really awkward and weird for me, and just trying to like figure out how to fit in. But like I said, because my parents had these different streams, I was like just clued in earlier. Something like unorthodox, that's like someone who's like stuck in that community, and then they're like getting married, right, at like 19 with almost no exposure to the outside world.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky that I had some exposure, especially once I was 13 and was living in Brooklyn full time. Beforehand, I was in Brooklyn like every other week, but living in Brooklyn full time, it was around me. Like you can't world out when you're living, when it's around you. So, it was certainly difficult, and I have always felt that like I was like a bit of a stranger in a circle that I was in, because I just have this totally different background. And even now, I'll have friends mention some like pop culture thing from the 90s, and I'll just be like, what is that? And they'll be like, what do you mean? And the same thing with music, like I'm constantly still finding music that's like, that everyone knows, and I'm just like, I don't really have that experience of that music, like Ace of Base or whatever. I'm just like,
well, you're not missing anything with Ace of Base.
Didn't really permeate.
Don't worry about it. You were lucky you weren't exposed to that music. So
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's very interesting because I mean, most of us, we grew up, just being exposed to music from birth. The radio was on when you'd be in the car with your parents. They were playing music. Friends, TV, you couldn't avoid it. So discovering music, and then becoming a DJ. So that it's pretty incredible, because the knowledge and the learning curve is huge. To go from nothing to to 100 that quickly is pretty incredible. You know, and also, you know, like, you know, credit to you, you know, when I have heard you DJ, you play, I'm like, how do you know that? You know, like, without even knowing your past, it's like you have a very, very deep knowledge. So, um,
Thanks. I mean, you know, sorry, I was just gonna say, once I found all this music, it became like an obsessive quest to just look for, you know, just like explore every genre to the deepest and furthest that I could explore it. So it kind of, I feel like I have a one up on everyone, because like for me, even Ace of Base, like hearing it, I'm like, it's the first time I'm hearing it, you know? So I'm like, one from, but yeah, go ahead. I interrupted you.
No. What I wanted to kind of get a sense of is, you know, from, you know, leaving, they say it's sort of like the derech, the path, the road. You left the road, and you sort of plowed your own. How did you, how, you know, how did you make money? How were you able to survive?
It was very difficult. When I was 16, I moved out of my mom's house in New Jersey, and I moved in with my oldest brother back in Muncie, actually. And he was living in an apartment that was owned by my aunt, and eventually he moved out, and I was kind of living on my own. So I was 16, living on my own, and I got a job at a cell phone company. At the time, there were these like cell phone dealerships that basically would, you know, buy phones from, I don't know, Verizon, AT&T, and then sell them in their dealerships. I first job, and then I worked in roofing and construction. I kind of just like took what I could find, did data entry, all sorts of stuff, until like my music gigs started paying me enough.
We
I basically when I think it was 2006, I quit. I was working construction. I quit construction, and I was making enough money as a musician and as a vocalist, singing these a cappella, to just do it full time. Not a lot. I was definitely living like paycheck to paycheck, but sort of that was how I did it. And in fact, it was pretty scary. But the moment that I quit my regular job to focus on it, I just started getting more gigs and was able to get it together, you know. And then I started DJing, and that kind of really was paying a lot better also than you know, guitar gigs. So
Well,
that's
how did you start
yeah, that's
DJing?
how
I mean, because you needed to get a record collection together. You know, you need
right.
a real pool of music before you can start playing. So, where were your first DJ gigs? What sort of places were you DJing at?
So it was totally random. I was in an Urban Outfitters in 2006, and I saw this little DJ controller where two iPods in, and didn't you can't control tempo or pitch, literally like two iPods and just the, you know, bass, mids, and highs and a crossfader. So I got that, and I had an iPod full of music, and I had this other iPod, like a Dell iPod, and just started doing that. And very quickly was like, well, this isn't gonna work because I don't, you know, I can't control tempo. My older brother, who had done a few DJ gigs with CDs, he was like, you know, you should get this like Newmark CD piece of gear. Pretty crappy piece of gear, but it allows you to like control tempo and pitch. And so I got that, and I just started burning mixes. And I mean, I've been burning CDs and mixes for years, so I just did that. You know, I've been pirating music off of Napster and whatever AOL areas. So that was my collection, was on CDs. Um, Started DJing with that, and basically just at house parties. Like, it's the whole thing started off in my apartment. I was like obsessing about the vibe being right in my apartment all the time when my friends came over. So, and then I was just throwing parties upstate, and people liked it. So my brother was like, hey, you know, you could make a lot more money doing this at a bar mitzvah or a wedding than, playing guitar. So he got me a couple gigs doing that, and those were my first gigs. I was playing like Jewish music at weddings and bar mitzvahs, and often at the end I would play like disco, like just regular Motown secular music. And that was kind of the niche that I fell into, because there are not a lot of Jewish DJs to begin with, but there are not a lot of Jewish DJs that can play, that know the Jewish music really well and also know secular music really well. So I kind of was like, found my niche doing that, and often would even get a gig, playing guitar first, and then at the end playing like, an hour set of disco or pop music. And that's kind of how it took off.
Wow. So you were able then to really, start a career as a DJ, and then as you were making more money, you started to build up your record collection and
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. So talk a little bit about your journey as a DJ, and sort of like your evolution and some of the things that you've done.
Sure. So this is around like 2009. I was getting really frustrated with living upstate in Rockland County and moved to the city. And I had this genius idea that I didn't realize everyone else had, which was, I was like, well, let me find a warehouse of mine, and we could like live there and throw parties, and it'll pay our rent, and it'll be a large space. Because I was like, kind of like, I'm moving from upstate with all the space to like do something I want to do. So I had made some friends in county, and we did it. We got a spot in Greenpoint, at which point we discovered that everybody else was doing the same thing at all these DIY spaces. And it was finally an opportunity for me to not play a wedding, which I wasn't that into anymore. And I could play parties at my own venue. So that's kind of how I did that. Some of the people that came to throw parties there, they were throwing like minimal house parties, psytrance, which was terrible to listen to, dubstep before it had blown. And so I kind of was getting, all these new streams of music that I didn't really know about. Like even house music, I didn't really know that much. I had some house music, but I just didn't. I was like really obsessed with funk and disco. I was just playing these parties and start to get a little bit of a reputation and make friends with some of these DJs and try to get gigs with these other DJs I was playing with. And then in 2010, a really good friend of mine had the misfortune of being in Miami, I think for Passover again, when another friend of who was like kind of trying to start his pop career got this opportunity to open for Rihanna at the
Wow.
New York State Fair in Syracuse. Yeah, so my friend calls me from Miami. He's like, I can't leave. He's with his on the holiday. He's like, you have to go do this. You have to go be the DJ. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. I'm open for Rihanna. So I went upstate. I went upstate with my friend, and I mean, I only played like 3 songs, but that was when I announced that on my social media at the time. All my friends who were like, yeah, David, DJ, whatever. They were like, oh, wait, he really is a DJ, because that's like a huge deal. So that kind of really put me on the map with like my friends. They started to take me seriously as a DJ, because, my pop music, and I really wasn't interested in playing pop music. So at this point, even though I opened for Rihanna, who's a huge pop star, they started to take me seriously, and I started to get a lot more of these other gigs, like the wedding gigs, but gigs like small spots in the Lower East Side and in the East Village, playing like open format, which I was quite good at from my wedding history. So I just got these open format things and started to get a reputation as a DJ. And at that point, yes.
Sorry, just to interrupt you for a second. Just going back a little bit, what was the first club you went to? Not as a DJ, but as a, somebody who's sort of like, left the Hasidic movement, and you're now, in this sort of like secular world, what was the first nightclub you went to? Do you remember, or some of the
Um,
experiences you had?
yeah, it was, you know, when I was like 21, my friends would drive from Rockland County to, I think it was like the Upper West Side, to these small bar club areas to try to like, you know, and that was my first club experience, like, or the spots in the meatpacking district. And I actually hated it. You know, I was super awkward. I didn't know how to like pick up women in a bar or a club. I didn't like all the pop music that was being played. So that was my first experience. I had no idea of like, you know, the underground and good music being played. So, you know, I just didn't care. That was it, and I didn't care for it at all. In fact, after a few times, I don't care about going. I'm not going to go.
Right.
So not until I was like, you know, the open format stuff, some of it in the meatpacking district, and starting to try to play like deeper. Like, did I start to hear about warehouse parties? And of course, I had this warehouse space myself. That was really my first experience, was my own space, people throwing parties there.
And so for them really coming to you and you
Right,
hearing, so instead of you having to try and discover these underground spots, you were just sitting there, you know, in
yeah,
the evening, and you'd hear a dubstep set for the first time, you'd hear a deep house set for the
right.
first time.
Yeah,
So
and yeah, I was at the underground. And you know, these like deep house parties were incredible. I was like, music is pretty good. Not fully what I was into, but it's like pretty, everybody's so well behaved, and like there's like this whole different vibe on the dance floor that I had never experienced before. It wasn't like about everybody just hitting on women and trying to like bring someone home. It was just like about being at a dance party. So that was my first like real experience of that.
and also the seeing sort of like the different sexualities and gay, trans, just the coming together, because you know um I'm sure that that was something that was not really encouraged within the Hasidic movement either, you know.
Right. Yeah, that would be an understatement. Any sexuality was not encouraged. You know, there was serious repression of all that. And, you know, when I was a teenager, I'd say, you know, once I was like out of the school I was living in, I dressed pretty alternatively, even for a teenager. I was like wearing like leather pants, and I would go and when I was in a band, my friends and I would go into like the women's section and just get like tight t-shirts to wear. And even amongst my friends who were not like fully religious, there was a lot of repression around all that. So, you know, once I spaced, and once I was experiencing like warehouse parties in Brooklyn and underground, I was able to see that there's this whole world of people that are just open about all that and accepting, which was, you know, a revelation for me.
I want to sort of like talk a little bit about the experience of DJing, the experience of being behind the turntables with a crowd of people and creating that sort of like, that vibe and spiritual experience, and comparing that to, with the Hasidic, community, something called nigun or niguim, which is where it's the same sort of thing. I mean, it's very, very similar. Can you talk a little bit about nigum and the process of that and how that is similar to the experience of DJing?
Yeah, sure. That's an excellent question. A nigun is a tune. It's a word for a song. Nigunim are like plural of that, and um, a lot of these Hasidic songs and a lot of most of the music of that guy she mentioned, there's not. It's pretty simple. There's usually like a verse and a chorus, and it's trance-like, and people kind of sing the same song together. A lot of people singing together, and just doing it over and over, they kind of get into a trance. And at a wedding, you know, they got really excited about it. The BPM of that is like pretty high. It's usually like 140 or higher. It's like almost like it's like really fast, or like techno. And people get kind of in a frenzy, you know, when they're dancing at these weddings. And there's something there. It's a vibe. And as a guitar player and vocalist, I definitely was like aware of picking up on that. And like, if I was in the right frame of mind, I would feel like I felt like a conduit for that. I could really just exchange this energy with God. And when I started DJing, it was very similar. It doesn't feel quite as when you play a live instrument, but very, very similar. And certainly, like, you know, when you're playing, when I'm playing in front of a crowd of a lot of people and they're really into it and dancing together, it's kind of the same thing. It's just like people dancing for dancing, and they're just lost in that. And as a DJ, I feel like a conduit for that. You know, I feel like I'm writing that, you know, I'm like listening to the music myself and feeling it too, and writing that together with the crowd.
Right. And you're building off the energy that you're getting from the crowd, and then vice versa. I mean, which is the same thing as a niguim, and the same thing as a DJ, you know, because the DJ,
Right.
the great DJs, you know, they're not just playing to themselves. It's like it's a oneness. It creates this oneness in the room, which is very,
Yes.
very similar. And you know, and everybody rises with that spiritual experience. You know, so I think that's fascinating. The
Mm-hmm.
similarities where you know, we look at people, and we think that they're so different to us, but in a way, we are all so similar. You know, I just
Yeah.
think it's fascinating.
I mean, it's the same. It's like I said, it's the same vibe. And, you know, I certainly was like being taught to like look down upon, you know, like ravers or whatever. But when it comes down to it, it's this literally the same thing. And it's beautiful to see that even in that community that's really repressed and closed off, that they have that as well. And I think all cultures have that, right? Like, just like the beat of the drum and dancing together, like that is like the most human thing. And being a DJ for me is sacred because of that, because it's like I feel like the vibe is my responsibility, and whatever that vibe is, you know, sometimes not necessarily playing like something high energy, sometimes it's playing background music. Lifting the vibe is what's the most important to me, and how I look at it, and trying to play quality music for people. So, and that's kind of how I approached being a wedding musician too, because, you know, after you've done a certain amount of weddings, it kind of becomes like the same thing. You're playing the same music every single time. It's the same thing, but I would look at it as like, this is like a sacred thing that's happening between people, and they're celebrating. Like, my responsibility as a musician is to really uplift that. And yeah, that's my same philosophy for DJing.
So you went from a very sort of insular community of people who, you know, were not accepting of anyone who sort of went off the path, and you found yourself,
Mm-hmm.
in the House of Yes community, you know, that
Right.
you worked in for a number of years. I mean, talk a little bit about, you know, House of Yes, where you know, you were doing the booking, and also doing some DJing. I mean, the House of Yes is, I think it was called like it was voted one of the best clubs in the world. You know, you know, it's so tragic that, you know, COVID has you know, shuttered everything, hopefully temporarily. But, you know, anyone who experienced the House of Yes knew what a unique vibe and inclusive vibe it was. Talk a little bit about that community for us.
Sure. I went to Burning Man for the first time in 2013, and House Yes kind of is like a Burning Man in the heart of Brooklyn, right? It's just all the founders and everyone who works there pretty much are burners, and they kind of bring that vibe. And so in 2016, when I heard that there was a new House Yes opening, because I was aware of earlier versions of it, having been in the DIY warehouse scene myself. They had like their own DIY space that I had visited. But I went there the first night that they opened, which was on New Year's Eve, which I don't recommend anyone open a club for the first time on New Year's Eve. It's tough. I went there and I even was DJing a little bit at like 5 a.m. and I was like, wow, this is amazing. At that time, the sound was pretty bad. They didn't have their act together fully yet because it was opening night. But in the coming months, I was one of the people who was throwing parties there with my homies. And every time I DJed there, it was such a treat. It was like the energy was so intense and positive and open. I was like, wow, this is like, it's just a dream to play here. Like this is the spot. Like there's nothing better than this vibe. And a few months later, Kay, who's one of the founders, she approached me. She's like, "Hey, do you want to be a resident? Do you want to?" I think she put it. She's like, "Do you want to put House Yes after your name when you're like on a flyer somewhere?" And I was like, "That would be amazing, you know?" And she was like, "Yeah, you can just like play here all the time, and we'll just like hire you all the time." I'm like, great, that's the dream. And so I was playing there, and it was really great. I could play pretty much whatever I wanted. I mean, the main room has a vibe. It's like a big room vibe, so you have to play to that. But it's just incredible house music, and it feels like a real connection to like the older clubs that you hear about, like the Paradise Garage from back in the day, and even Studio 54. Like just like you hear people talking about that who've been to those clubs. So in late 2018, they needed a new music director, and I actually approached them. I was like, "You should hire me," because I really feel like I could. I know them really well. They're all my friends. Jackie, my partner, is the marketing director, so I kind of like had a deeper understanding of how the place was running, and they hired me, which was a huge honor, and I could do what I was doing as a DJ, but on just on a larger level. And like, instead of me DJing, I could put on other DJs that I respect or believe in who have a similar ethos to the way they play. And that's kind of how I've approached that. And it's been a huge to be able to do that and be able to book all these incredible luminary world of electronic dance music, in funk, in disco, in rear groove, just like all these people. It's been really great to be able to like have a hand in having experience that at House of Yes. So it's a huge honor to work.
And you said that it had that vibe of sort of like the back in the day sort of Paradise Garage, Studio 54. And
Mm-hmm.
when Ian Schrager opened up the Edition in Times Square, and in there he had the Paradise Club, they asked House of Yes to create a cabaret show to be part of that. So obviously you guys were doing something right that did strike a chord, and that's where we got to work with each other again. Obviously around the opening, and then when the place got opened.
Mm-hmm.
But talk a little bit about the show that they had there, which was a House of Yes production.
Yeah, it was at that point I had been involved in several of these sort of shows at House of Yes itself, as the music director, sometimes composing music or doing sound design for some of these shows. So when Anya, the other House of Yes, was approached by, I think it was Ben Pundal and Ian Schrager,
Mm-hmm.
to do the show. She just went to her team, and I was part of that team to work on the music for that show. So the show is kind of like a variety show with a little bit of like a loose storyline in it. and
Like
it
Adam and
was,
Eve, right? At the
yeah,
in the
Adam
garden.
and
Yeah,
Eve
yeah.
and heaven and hell.
Hmm.
It was an interesting idea, and it was really fun to be involved in that, and write some music for it. We actually, one of the ideas I had was to have the lead vocalist slash host sing "Sympathy for the Devil," and
Hmm.
we went to the studio. That's how he opens the show. We actually went to the studio and recorded with like a whole band, and it didn't sound. It sounded terrible. So I actually I was staying in the hotel the week before. It was really, really hectic. I had also been working full time as a music director at House of Yes. It was like just a few months into that job, so it was like quite. And literally the night before the show opened, I just recorded that whole "Sympathy for the Devil" track on this little keyboard in the hotel, which felt like pretty rock and roll. And yeah, it was quite fun and cool to DJ as well. Ian was there, or other people that are connected to that world, and be able to like push a little bit of the House of Yes vibe into times.
Yeah, and my big question is, where did you find the Umbrella Girl? Because she, I mean, all the performers were unbelievable, but the Umbrella Girl was, I mean, like, I just, I've never seen anybody do that with an, I mean, incredible. I mean,
I know, it's incredible. Yeah,
yeah,
that I mean, there's a whole family of House of Yes performers that she is tapped into, and Kay tapped into, because they themselves were in that world, like the circus performer world.
yeah,
And so I don't know, she must have found, I don't know where she found her, but we were definitely talking
unbelievable.
about like, how can you to like twirl umbrellas on your feet? Like, where does that start? I don't know, but it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, unbelievable. We're almost out of time, David. So, is there anything else
Mhm.
you wanna say that 'cause I really appreciate the fact that you've been so open about your background. Is there anything else you want to say, or before we go?
Sure, sure. I mean, I first of all, I appreciate talking to you. Since I first worked for you at Samsung as a DJ, I've always greatly respected you and Giant Step. Especially once I like learned what Giant Step was all about. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very difficult time for nightlife right now, and I'm really hoping that things will come back at some point and that people will be safe in the coming months as we try to get out of this pandemic, and um, that everybody will come together at House of Yes, at wherever they are, whatever community they're in, and be able to dance together safely. That's pretty much the theme right now, right? And I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, and it is going to happen. I know I say this every time, but we will all be back on the dance floor at some point, and it's going to be just as good, if not better, um, because we're gonna appreciate everybody and everything, and all the people who put so much hard work into giving us that enjoyment and entertainment that I feel maybe we all took for granted a little bit. And
Yeah,
I think it'll be even better than it was. It's just been obviously a tough hiatus for a lot of people. Um,
yeah.
David, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on here and telling us your unique story. It really is fascinating. And I hope to see you in person on the dance floor very, very soon, and everyone else who joined us today. So thank you so
I
much.
hope so too. Thank you. Have a good one. Happy
Okay.
Passover.
Thank you. Same to you. And goodbye, everyone. Have a great weekend. We'll see you very, very soon. Take care. Bye bye.